Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today, we have the opportunity to talk about taking the fight for freedom to the courts. We have great friends with the Alliance Defending Freedom, with First Liberty Institute, with Liberty Counsel, and we're winning a lot. But what you may not know is this. There are many individual lawyers who have jumped into the fray on their own to protect our constitutional rights. And our guest today is one of those attorneys. His name is Paul Davis. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Paul. Paul is a God-fearing, freedom-fighting lawyer from Texas. You got to love Texas, who is actively engaged in the legal fight for our freedoms. And I first saw him on an Instagram when he presented at the school board meeting and directly confronted the board chair regarding her outrageous display, as he said, of tyranny. In fact, at that meeting, he actually served her papers for a civil rights lawsuit to hold every one of them accountable. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on, Jimmy.
So when I talk about that moment when when you're at the board meeting, you remember it well, I'm imagining, where you served her papers. I got to tell you, that was the best video at that time about someone who was confronting a school board about the nonsense that's going on in our schools and actually served legal papers. Tell us, what were the circumstances that made you go to the podium and get involved in that way?
Man, it was, I had never, that was literally the second school board meeting I'd ever been to in my life. I'm a single man, don't have kids, so I have no reason to go to a school board meeting other than, people in the community were all riled up and I'm very involved. I go to a lot of Patriot meetings and, I'm apprised of what's going on. So some people reached out to me and just told me about what was going on in the school district, McKinney ISD, and, showed me the books that they had in the libraries, which were just mind blowing,
Yes.
what they, what they have in those books. It's just outrageous. And so I agreed to go to the meeting and watch, what was going on. And, I actually was retained like the only trustee on the school board who's a real conservative, who's actually trying to get these books out and, get all the just LGBTQ garbage out of McKinney ISD. His name Chad Green. And so I was actually, his lawyer. I was there as his lawyer. Wow. And as I watched this meeting unfold, I've seen few things more disturbing. Just being in America, you would never expect to see something like this. The meeting starts and the school board president, Amy Dankel, announces, she just goes in this spiel about how, we have to maintain order at these meetings. And so for that reason, nobody is allowed to clap. Nobody's allowed to comment. Nobody's allowed to make any kind of noise. You're not allowed to have a sign of any kind. And, if you do any of these things, you're going to be immediately ejected from the meeting. And it was just, just the way she did it first, it just created this very ominous atmosphere. Yeah. And, it was just very restrictive.
Yeah.
And then as the meeting went on, they had public comment at the beginning, and you could tell in the room just by looking around the room who was on which side, because the people who were trying to get the books out of the school libraries were all wearing green because they were there to support Chad Green, who was the only person who was standing up on the board. And everybody else was wearing, for the most part, was wearing blue because they formed a pack to support the school board president and her position to keep the books in the schools. And then as the meeting went on, it was very clear that only, people on both sides were clapping, cheering, things like that. But somehow only the people wearing green got dragged out. And the most salient example, like the first person, I just couldn't even believe it. I know this guy personally. His name's Kevin Witt. He's an activist, former, trans, what do you call it? Like he was a prostitute actually for years. And then he found Jesus and turned his life around. Now he's a family, pro-family advocate.
Amazing.
And he just somebody read an excerpt out of one of these books, and it was just disgusting.
Yes.
That's the only way to describe it. And he just goes, disgusting. That's all he said. One word. All of a sudden the cops swarm around him and he's like, don't touch me. I'm not leaving, and they like drag him out of the meeting.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, granted, he did violate the rule, but the other thing was it was so crowded in there, he wasn't even able to make it in there to hear her rules, so he didn't even know about it. But
Wow.
then as the meeting went on, like there was one point where it's clear, like I said, people on both sides were clapping, making noise, muttering, between speakers. But she had the police physically remove people. I mean, it was a big scene, at least 4 or 5 people, and they were all people wearing green. And then, and she would like stop the meeting if she heard anything. She'd be like, "All right, who said that? Who did?" And she had the head of security like point. She's like, "You're going to point out whoever made noise." And so he would like point out people, but he would only point at the people wearing green shirts. And then at one point in the meeting, somebody who was against the books got so fed up and so disgusted that he just storms out and he's just like, "I'm leaving. All y'all are pedophiles," and just like storms out.
Creates a scene.
Yeah. And then all the people in blue start like erupt in cheers and clapping and everything, like very loud, much louder than any of the people wearing green did. Wow. And so everybody on our side's like, "You got to throw all these people out. They just blatantly violated your rules." And she said, she was like kind of flustered. And then she just stops and goes, "Well, they weren't clapping and cheering, while someone else was speaking." And we're like, neither were any of our people. Like it's so blatantly obvious.
It feels like kindergarten. Like I feel like I'm reliving either junior high or maybe kindergarten, but all of it's nonsense, right? I mean, in America, that your hands are tied, your voice is silenced. And I remember, and I'll tell you the same thing, Paul, the first time I ever went to a board meeting here in Northern Colorado, which, first of all, you're in Texas. Okay. So we are debunking the myth that the school systems in Texas are all conservative, none of this nonsense. We're debunking that right now because I've had plenty of friends say, "Well, I'm moving to Texas." I'm like, "Well, okay, I got you. But just know that no matter where you go, this progressive, Marxist, anti-American ideology is everywhere. So you're going to have to fight no matter where you are." But the first time I went to a board meeting here in Colorado, very similar, we would share. There were all kinds of rules. I actually went over my time. You know how they put the 90-second or a 3-minute time limit? I went over the time and I literally had the police officer nose to cheek. He was this close to me to escort me out literally 3 seconds after I was done. And I said, "Hey, I just want to finish my statement. It's one more sentence." And then they escorted me out. They wouldn't let me finish. They escorted me out. And but then I developed a great relationship with all of the police officers because they know that this is nonsense. I mean, most police officers know that all of this is nonsense, and we developed a great relationship, and so that's gone better. But I have a different question for you. So I know that your journey into freedom, you've probably been a patriot your whole life, but your journey into freedom took a very distinct turn on January 6th. I know that it was a turning point for you, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how your life changed that day and in the days following that. Tell us what that day was like. First of all, I want to know what it was like to be there because I had friends that were there that said it was magnificent for the whole day. And many of them didn't even know what happened late. But tell us about what that day was like.
I wouldn't necessarily describe it as magnificent.
Well, not the part where not the part where the there was the storming of the Capitol, but the greater part of that day was prayer groups. You had Concerned Women for America. You had all these great speeches being given that were really inspirational about America and our values. But tell me about your experience there on the 6th.
Yeah. So, I was going to say before, you said that you made friends with all the cops. I was like, I wish I could say the same about the McKinney police. We had to sue several of the police officers as well because they're clearly not on our side.
Well, hey, okay. So before we go to January 6th, whatever happened with the lawsuit that you served them? What happened with that?
It's still pending. Okay. So we sued the school board president. As you saw in the video, I called her out. And the funny thing about that video is, I got down from the podium and my operations manager / paralegal was there. And I was like, cause we're trying, we wanted to make a stir so that we could raise attention to this. And I was just like, I don't feel like I did a very good job with that, and I was like, we posted it and then we watched it. It was like 1 million new people would view it every hour on TikTok and it got up to like 8 million views. And then, but what was funny is that because I called the school board president a fascist, a lot of leftist people think that's actually a term for the right, which actually fascism is National Socialism, which is a left-wing ideology.
Yes.
So that's a misconception. But because I said that, a lot of, and I never indicated like which side I was on. I didn't indicate like what the dispute was about. I had a lot of leftists with like LGBTQ rainbows and all kinds of stuff being like, this guy's an American hero. He stood up to this fascist school board dictator, and stuff. And they all thought I was like some leftist. I was like, that is hilarious.
It's because you're in Texas. No, it's because you're in Texas. They're assuming what I would was that the school is conservative, but it's the exact opposite of that. Well, and it's funny.
That's what they did.
Right. Yeah. And what she did too was to try and shut down conversation. And the school board here in Northern Colorado is doing the same thing. In fact, they put out these warnings that if you don't behave in a certain way, that they will pursue you legally for defamation if you say anything personal about any of the board members. So some of the things that you said to this board chair would be called into question here in Northern Colorado.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, we have an anti-SLAPP statute in Texas, which is basically like SLAPP is like suits limiting access to public participation.
Wow.
And so you can, if someone's a public figure, you can say pretty much whatever you want as long as it's not like blatantly false. Like they have to conclusively prove it's false in order to sue you. But we sued the president, Amy Denkel, she's very special.
Yeah.
For First Amendment First Amendment viewpoint discrimination. Same with the police. The defendants, they filed two, different qualified immunity motions for summary judgment, claiming, we have qualified immunity, but in order to prove qualified immunity, you have to show that let me put it conversely. So the plaintiff, to get around qualified immunity, has to show that it was a clearly established constitutional right. Clearly, you have the right to speak and not be discriminated against for that. You have to prove that it was clearly established at the time, so that there had to be some kind of like case law or something that would make it clear to the public official that they can't do this. And so they're arguing, we have qualified immunity because there's they're arguing against those things. I'm like, are you really? Okay. Last time I checked, I think everybody's heard of equal protection under the law. That was the 14th Amendment passed, shortly after the Civil War. So you're trying to claim you weren't aware that it's not legal to discriminate against people because of their viewpoint. That's kind of sad. Right. But so we've all the briefings done. I was really disappointed. Like that's all still pending. The judge has been sitting on it since I think September. Wow. We're just waiting on our ruling. The one thing he did rule on, and this was fascinating, the board president, Amy Denkel, and the superintendent both filed false and frivolous bar grievances against me to try to go after my license. Wow. And actually their attorneys did it on their behalf. Wow. And they're blatant lies. And I filed a motion to show cause in the court saying they can't do this. Like this is, unethical. And the court didn't take that up. So apparently you can just lie about opposing counsel and that's fine and dandy. And,
of course,
nobody's going to do anything.
Yeah, depending upon the prosecuting judge or who's in charge of that, you're exactly right. And okay, so let's shift gears then. So those are still pending. I'm waiting for you to win. I want those to be wins on the board, okay? Tell us about January 6th. I know that was a pivotal day, a life-changing day.
Yeah, that was, it was kind of like, I read this book one time called Forgiving What You Can't Forget by, can't remember, I'm drawing a blank on the author's name. She's Lisa TerKeurst. She talked about how, there's these moments in your life. It's like, in time we have BC and AD, and it's like you can have a personal BC and AD, and it's like that one moment where your life has just changed forever. And that was January 6th for me because I went there. You had talked about how people said, "Oh, it was so wonderful and everything," and that's how I felt after. I went to the December 12th Stop the Steal rally in DC and just had the time of my life. I mean, I've always been really into politics, but I was always very more vocal on like social media, just, putting out my thoughts. I never really like went to meetings and stuff. Right. And that was really the first political rally I'd ever been to, other than like, I think I went to one Trump rally and I loved it. I met so many wonderful people and we prayed together over our country and marched around the Supreme Court and, all the speeches were so inspiring. And so I was like, when I heard about the January 6th rally, I just wanted more of that. I just wanted to be around those people, be encouraged, and, just feel like I was doing something, praying for our country and making our presence known, basically.
Yeah. And you're coming from Texas. I mean, you're making a commitment to go from Texas to DC. I spent a lot of years, an hour from the Capitol, less than an hour from the Capitol. We spent most of my adult life there. Now we're in Colorado, but that's a big commitment to go to that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I went all by myself. Wow. I didn't really know anybody else that wanted to go. And I showed up, and I was just expecting more of what I saw like on January or on December 12th. So I went to the speeches and everything. I was very inspired. Thought it was great, and it was really cold. Yeah. I was underdressed. I looked at the temperature, and like I was not dressed warmly enough, so my teeth were chattering. I was hypothermic, and so but I was like, I'm not leaving until Trump speaks. So
listen, wait a minute, time out. A typical Texan. I mean, seriously, It's warm in Texas. Oh, DC, how cold could it be?
Yeah. Well, I looked at the weather report, and it said like 45 degrees, and I was like, okay, well, that's not that cold. But I swear, when I got out there, the temperature must have dropped dramatically. I mean, it was really, really cold. Yeah. And so I didn't go to the Capitol after the speeches. I walked all the way back to my hotel, and the sea of people took me forever. Wow. I thawed out, and put on an overcoat, and then I started walking back to the Capitol, and it was just like, when I walked up, it was just such a chaotic scene. It was really difficult to grasp what was happening. And because I wasn't I didn't check the news or anything like that. Yeah. And then, so I just kept walking towards the building to just see what was going on. And, there wasn't any outer barrier or anything, that was all gone by the time I got there. I saw that stuff later on the news. And then, I went in that scaffold, where they built the scaffolds, for the inauguration. It was kind of just like a football stadium type atmosphere, like people were just chanting USA, stop the steal. And, so I just stayed there for a while. I knew one other person that had come, and I was trying to find him. And he said he was from what I could tell, it seemed like he was on the other side of the scaffolding. So I started to make my way to the other side. And that's when I saw the Capitol Police for the first time. Oh. And it was pretty intimidating. I mean, it was probably a line of maybe 3 or 4 deep, and they were, heavy riot gear and all that stuff. But then I saw my friend Paul, also named Paul. And he was just, it wasn't really like that area where I was in, everybody was pretty calm. He was literally just standing there. He's like, I'm just here talking to the police, shooting videos and stuff. And, he's like, why don't you just hang out? I was like, cool. Yeah. So I was just kind of standing there taking it all in. Yeah. And then just out of nowhere, without any warning, all of a sudden there's these flashbang grenades blowing up around me and tear gas grenades. And I was just so shocked and confused because from what I could tell, from where I was, nobody was doing anything to provoke that. And so I kind of felt especially looking back and knowing kind of just everything, just the whole picture of what was going on, it seemed like they were provoking us. Cause that, nobody was really, people were upset, but they weren't being rowdy or anything at that point until they started firing on us, basically. And so, I was just shell shocked, I just kind of didn't really know how to process that. And, I thought it was so wrong.
So what do you do at that point? Because I saw the same thing, and we saw footage that would imply, of course, that the agitation was provoked. This was invited, it was provoked, and then of course now we know more. We know that there were FBI agents throughout the crowd that were stoking chaos. We know that there was Antifa strategically placed around the event specifically for the break-ins. We now know that there was a lot more happening at this event than first meets the eye. And now we know that there's 14,000 hours of video that, if ever released, will tell a much different story, I'm imagining. But so this happens to you now. What do you do now? Now, because this has got to cause a big pause now. Boy, should I be here? What happened at that point?
Yeah, it was just really, I just remember feeling really confused because I was should I stay here? Should I go? Like, I don't feel like, I just felt like I'm here exercising my First Amendment right. And I don't feel like I should leave just because I got tear gassed, because I knew like I know trespass law. I hadn't, from what I could tell, I hadn't crossed any, boundary or, I hadn't tried to cross the police line or anything like that. So I just kind of stood there and then they would keep like, I think I remember they shot off like another round of tear gas, and then they advanced. They kind of started to push the crowd back. And so at that point, that's when I observed people. Like, I specifically remember they threw this old lady against a wall. Like, it was like this elderly black woman. And I was so disturbed by that. And it was like, I saw several, veterans, like elderly people that looked like they were veterans, like wearing like kind of, I don't know, just like military patches and stuff, and getting abused by the police. And it was just really disturbing. But so I finally was like, it started to get dark or it seemed like the sun was about to go down. So I just started walking back and then it was like all hell broke loose. Cause I got back to my hotel room and I was engaged at the time. And I had this huge fight with my fiance who called me and was super upset about everything she was seeing on the news and like didn't understand it. And like, I couldn't, I felt like I was talking to a leftist. I was just like, this is crazy. Like, you don't understand like why I'm here. And like, and all she's like, well, what about that guy with the horns? And I'm like, is that what they're showing on the news? I was like, I remember seeing that guy at the December 12th rally, but that guy seems like a weirdo.
Yeah.
But anyway, then I got a text from my best friend, and it was a screenshot of this tweet by this guy named Roger Sullenberger, who is a journalist for Salon. And it said, basically accused me of being it said, this is Paul Davis. He's an attorney. Today he stormed the Capitol to stage a coup against the government and documented it on Instagram. And I was like, that's not what happened. But by the time I got it, 500,000 people had seen it. And that was only 2 hours later. And so I was like, as soon as I saw that tweet, I just knew my life was never going to be the same, because I knew it was a Twitter mob and they tagged my employer. And so the next morning, like 3 million people had seen it by the next morning. And then I got fired at 8:30 a.m.
Oh my gosh. So without really even having a conversation. So two things happened. One is you lost a fiance because her leftist tendencies were exposed, and that's just not going to work. And then,
I mean, she was just kind of apolitical. Like she just didn't really like politics, like she would consider herself a conservative, but she just doesn't like any of that. So it was just too much. It was too much for her to handle. And then it did show me that we were very much on the same page, or not on the same page as far as our beliefs. Cause I remember her saying, like, I was just trying to process it all with her. And she said, well, what, the phrase that sticks in my head is, she said, well, you believe what you believe just as strongly as Black Lives Matter believes what they believe. So why are you right? And I was like, wow, what? Come again? I was like, I believe in the objective truth of the Bible. Right. That says, like, you don't teach fake history to sow division. You don't tell lies to sow division. You don't, they believe in abortion. They have said they want to destroy the nuclear family. Yes. So I don't know what to tell you.
That's a sign. Like we'd always say in the country folk would say that's a sign, and you need to pay attention. You need to pay attention to that.
I pretty much knew we were done at that point. I mean, we had, I was actually on January 12th, I was supposed to find us a counselor just to kind of help us work out our issues. I wasn't very optimistic about that, but figured it was worth it because we were already engaged. So we might as well try to talk it out. Yeah. But then, that day went very differently. I got a call from the FBI, or my neighbor, saying that the FBI was at my house. So
wow. Okay. That's what I wanted to ask you was, were you ever investigated? Did the FBI show up at your house? Were you ever questioned? Were you arrested?
They showed up at my house. I wasn't there. I was actually too scared to be there by myself because I didn't know who was going to show up. Because basically, I several people had doxed me and put my address out there, and including the Dallas Morning News, said I lived in Frisco, at least. And actually, pretty shocking. I was too scared to get on a plane out of DC because they were saying, I was hearing all these rumors that they were just going to round everybody up, and I was like, they're probably just picking people up at the airport, and I don't want to deal with that. So I just rented a car and started driving home. And then I got a call, from somebody who's like, oh, Dallas Morning News just tweeted you lived in Frisco. And then I was like, there's probably going to be some kind of mob at my house. So I called my dad. I'm like, you got to go to my house, get all my valuables out, just get everything, I gave him like a list of stuff to get. And then I called my fiance. I was like, hey, my dad's coming to the house. Can you give him the key? She refused to give him the key. My dad ended up having to break into my house through my side window. So it was just not a great situation.
Let's pause there for a second, because I just want to remind everyone, this is America. You are afraid for your safety because of the way social media demonizes. We've got the social media mob that is out, that's doxing you, which for those that don't know, doxing means that they're giving your personal address. They're giving personal information about you that everyone now knows. So just like they protested out in front of the Supreme Court justices' homes, which of course is illegal also, there's that was a whole nother legal problem. They were going to be threatening you. And so it's a stunning development for me, because that could happen to anyone. And it is a concern, right? But you were never arrested. You were never questioned. None of that.
So they came to my house. I was staying somewhere else, and my neighbor called me and told me about it. And she's like, "Hey, I think the feds are at your house." I was just like, "Oh my gosh!" That was like the scariest moment of my life. I was freaking out. Yeah. And then she got the whole thing on video, because she has like video surveillance. Like her house was pretty close to mine, so she like trained all her video on them, and you could see them come up to the door. They, you could hear them actually. They said, "Oh, maybe he's still in DC." One of the agents said, and then they drove around. They drove around the back of my house, parked in my driveway, and went into my side yard. Like opened my gate, went on my private property with no warrant, obviously, and then they took a shard of glass from the broken window and leaned it up against the garage. And I presume that was so they could check back later to see if I had come home. And then they put what looked like a listening device outside of my garage. My neighbor got a picture of it, and it was like it looked like a bug. Really? I guess so they could hear when my garage door went up and down. So
unbelievable.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And so I spent that day finding a criminal attorney and talked to him, and he talked to the FBI agent, and then he called me and he's like, "Oh, good news." He's like, "They're not charging anybody in your area, because nobody really did anything where you were. And they just wanted to, question you about what you saw and stuff." And I was like, well, I'm not talking to him. I was like, you can tell them, if they want to bring me in, they're going to have to charge me with something, because I know I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. And he also said, "Oh, and they said, they're not going to pick you up. You're free to go home." But my neighbor had called me meanwhile and said, "Hey, that FBI car is circling the block. So they're just basically waiting for you."
Jeez. So I'm
they lied to my lawyer apparently, and they're going to pick me up for questioning.
Unbelievable.
But no, I was never charged with anything, and I just gave them a written statement. I was just like, I didn't cross any clearly marked boundaries. I didn't assault anybody. I didn't vandalize anything. Didn't go into the Capitol. So
Well, and you're one of the lucky ones, right? Because there still are political prisoners being held in the DC prison, which has been described as worse than Guantanamo Bay prison conditions. They're still there. And some of them, to my understanding, still have not been charged with crimes, which is an interesting violation of their constitutional rights. So let me ask you this. I know that you've been outspoken about your faith. That it has been a tough year, but that you really credit your faith in Jesus specifically, for sustaining you through this period. Tell us a little bit about what your faith means to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my faith in God. Because, I mean, I got super depressed. It was really rough. I mean, I lost everything overnight. It was like, it was like the book of Job in real life, except I didn't have any kids that died. But, amazing. I lost my career pretty much because I lost that job. I had actually... I had wanted to go in-house so long, get out of the law firm environment because it's very it's just extremely stressful and can be very toxic. And I actually loved this job that I had with Goosehead Insurance. I was, in-house counsel and human resources director. And I actually enjoyed going to work. That was the first job I'd had since law school that I really enjoyed. And so losing that was pretty traumatic. And then it's I couldn't find another job because I was all over the news. And so it was my career is effectively destroyed at that point.
Wow.
And then, I got unengaged within 2 weeks, and that pretty much broke up our friend group. Cause my whole social life was hanging out with other couples, and couldn't do that anymore. And then my church got super woke. I'd already head that direction, so I didn't have any support there. Wow. And I pretty much had nobody except, my parents and God. And so I just reached this point. Well, and then it's like, I filed this election integrity lawsuit, and the guy, I put all my time and energy into that. And it turns out the guy that was running that kind of put it all together and roped me in. He was just a total con artist. He just was using me. And I kind of think he might've made off with some of the money that he raised for it. I'm not sure. That's just speculation, but I was supposed to be paid for my work. I never got a dime. So I ended up having to sell my house. I had no money. And so it was rough. And so I hit this point where it was just I just remember thinking, man, when's the last time I made it through a day without crying? Not just just bitterly, it was that bad.
It's horrible.
And and so I just, I really did. Oh, and I found out my fiance started dating somebody else 2 weeks later. I mean, that was horrible.
Your best friend,
so, yeah. I mean, might as well have been. But so I just reached this point where I didn't know what to do. And, I just felt like giving up. It's not really in my nature, but I didn't really know what else to do with my life. And then I just felt God very clearly just say, I just felt this very strong impression, get up, brush yourself off, and I got a job for you. I want you to start your own law firm and just move forward with that.
It's fantastic.
And that was literally, it really was the last thing that I wanted to do. It sounded exhausting to me. I just felt like I had nothing left, but I was like, okay. So I printed business cards, and I just started handing them out at the Patriot meetings that I go to, and just announced that, I'm open for business. And, and then the very next week, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Biden gets on and announces the vaccine mandates. And, guess what my specialty is it's employment law. So all of a sudden, I was one of the only conservative employment attorneys around, because most of them are pretty liberal. And then all of a sudden I went from having nothing to do to being completely overwhelmed. Just my phone rang off the hook all day long. I had no staff. I had no infrastructure. All I had done was print business cards. So on the fly, I had to figure out a business model and templates and hire somebody. And then we just went gangbusters on
marketing, everything.
All of that. Yeah. So we just went gangbusters on that for about, several months, and I'm proud to say, saved hundreds of people's jobs. I mean,
amazing.
I had pretty much a perfect record for about the first maybe 3 or 4 months of the vaccine mandates, because I knew, being a former HR director, defending employers for almost 10 years, I know how the sauce is made. I know exactly how to phrase things to kind of put the employer in a box that if you fire this person, you're going to get sued. Wow. And so, but then it's then even despite that, the further you got in, the employers started to be well, sue us, go ahead and do it,
Yeah.
And so we have,
wow. Of course. Well,
we have several lawsuits. Yeah.
So what a change though. I mean, sometimes, God takes the kind of some of our worst circumstances, the things that we don't understand, the things that we would never ask for, and then he turns that mess into a masterpiece. I know it can be cliche, but the truth is, a lot of times we don't understand that sometimes God's delivering us out of something into something that we're really destined to do. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call a quick pause on this, and we're going to wrap up part 1 of this podcast, where I'm going to divide this into 2. So everybody that's enjoyed this so far, we've got a barn burner on the backside. So stay with us for the next episode of part 2 with Paul Davis next time.